I'm Diana MacDonald. You can find me online at Digital, which is where I will post links to slides later, as well as more resources for learning more. As Kevin mentioned, I'm a designer and team lead of the design systems team at CultureAmp. I'm passionate about interaction design, so I wrote this book, Practical UI Patterns for Design Systems, and I am also a coder. I'm the creator of this typing practice app called TypyType for stenographers, which I made in React for budding courtroom reporters and mechanical keyboard enthusiasts to learn to type over 200 words per minute. Now, there's a proud tradition of blind stenographers, so I wanted to create an app that was particularly accessible to people with visual impairments. And one day I found myself down a rabbit hole trying to create a great experience when presenting the words that people need to type. An Italian stenographer reached out to me to tell me that they were using a screen reader and there was a weird bug where seemingly random letters were being dropped from what they were supposed to type. Virtual DOMs give us an excellent developer authoring experience, but they do have surprising behavior from time to time. We'll get back to that bug later. Today, I'm going to cover some foundations around virtual DOM diffing, screen readers, and AriaLive regions. And then we'll have a look at Aria Atomic, double announcer regions, and what you can do with the web speech API. So first up, virtual DOMs. This is the concept of an ideal or virtual representation of your user interface that's kept in memory and synced with the real DOM through a library like React DOM. I'll focus on React, which has a syncing process called reconciliation. But as I understand it, there's similar behavior in change detection in Vue and incremental DOM in Angular. So everything else that follows is roughly the same. The actual DOM, the document object model, includes elements such as paragraph tags that may contain nodes like text nodes and comment nodes. And here you can see I've arbitrarily split a whole piece of text across two text nodes. And this can happen for all different random reasons. But you can also look at this in your developer tools on the console using child nodes to actually see we do in fact have two text nodes and a comment node here. This is a live node list of the paragraph. Now in a virtual DOM, when you render a JSX element, every object in the tree, the entire tree, gets updated. And this can be fast because there's nothing being drawn to the screen. React then works out the differences between the virtual and actual DOM, and that's diffing. And then efficiently takes the steps needed to manipulate the DOM to achieve the desired user interface. So that's virtual DOMs. Screen readers are a type of assistive technology that helps people use and understand and interact with web pages. A screen reader such as JAWS, NVDA, or VoiceOver may read a web page's contents aloud to a user, which helps people with visual impairments in particular, such as our Italian stenographer with low vision, who might otherwise have difficulty understanding your web page. So in this case, if you're focused on the button, it might say Start Typing button. You're currently on a button. To click this button, press Control Option Space. AriaLive regions are a particular technique that you can use in your accessibility toolbox to improve the experience for people using assistive technology. While a screen reader has focus on one part of the page, such as that button, you might want to add content elsewhere on the page, such as adding an alert to notify people to new content or an error, or you might update content elsewhere on the page, such as changing stock prices or a train time schedule or the number of tickets left. A live region may be used to announce that dynamically updated content elsewhere on the page without moving the screen reader's focus from where they are. The live region is often specified using an AriaLive attribute, usually on a div, and often with a value of polite or assertive. Polite means the screen reader will politely wait until the appropriate time to start an announcement such as when you've stopped typing, which is often what you want. So to announce a dynamic change, for live regions to work, you need to have that present on the document from the start, usually empty, so that the browser and screen reader can be monitoring it for changes. Then any newly added dynamic content will be announced. That means you can't conditionally render the div at the same time as adding the message. That won't be monitored by the screen reader or browser, and it won't be announced. So you need to have a persistent region and then add dynamic content to it. So that was the basics. Now we'll look at some extra bits and pieces, such as Aria Atomic, which is an attribute you can use on live regions. Normally, if you change content in a live region, only the changed parts will be announced, unless you add Aria Atomic equals true to reread the entire contents of the live region when it changes. So without Aria Atomic, this would say the estimated time of arrival is 2:30 p.m. And if you change the time to 2:40 and add an extra note, there's been a delay, the atomic live region would say the estimated time of arrival is 2:40 p.m., there's been a delay. Without that attribute, it would just say 2:40 p.m., there's been a delay. And that's not a lot of context, so it's unclear to know what's happening. But when virtual DOM gets involved, something different happens. The reconciliation process efficiently changes the text node directly. So we saw our text nodes on the console earlier. React would change that in place without rewriting the element, and this can confuse a screen reader. For example, an NVDA user of your React app may hear the content in an atomic live region announced repeatedly, once for each character range that has changed in your live region. So here we've changed 2 character ranges, so you might hear this entire message announced 2 or more times. Without Aria Atomic, however, the NVDA user might only hear the changed characters in each range. So they might hear 4, there's been a delay, which is even less context. So to work around this, you might use double announcer regions and skip Aria Atomic. So in this approach, you start with a single AriaLive region and a second one, usually both empty. So for the first announcement, you add text to the first region. For the second announcement, you add text to the second region and clear the first. For another announcement, you add it back to the first and clear the second region, and you continue alternating between the 2 of them like this. This gives you full authoring control over the announcement and mimics the behavior of Aria Atomic without those weird quirks we saw earlier. And this approach is handy for any live region that will be updated more than once. The double announcer approach is used in these packages. Vue was inspired by React, and React was inspired by Angular, which is a great reminder to see what we can learn from other tools and frameworks. My recommendation is to keep testing. When you're thinking about switching from jQuery to React or some tool to another, even a direct port you would expect to behave the same might not, so test with real users using their real devices. Even if you diligently replace all of your pointless divs with semantic markup that accurately describes what it's supposed to do, you can't always trust that the syntax will have the effect that you believe it will, so you need to test with real users. Beyond AriaLive regions, in a virtual DOM world, you might need to think about how CSS animations work. What you would normally use in CSS might need to be translated and restructured to work with React transitions. And even if you diligently build and test your double announcer regions into a reusable component, doesn't mean it will necessarily work in production. If, for example, you have a design system that has a notification component, it might still fail if the API isn't quite right, and you try to use the component with conditional rendering, adding the message at the same time as the live regions. It won't work. Outside of double announcer regions, you might also be interested to learn a little about web speech. Now, this approach is not appropriate for a lot of announcements, but it is interesting for a small niche of features in the world, so I hope this gets you excited about the Web Speech API and maybe is useful to you in your situation. The Web Speech API includes speech synthesis and speech recognition. The synthesis part is pretty well supported, so it's in all modern browsers and a few mobile browsers as well. You do need to be mindful, however, of cross-browser behavior and differences in text-to-speech synthesis engines across operating systems. So getting back to my stenotyping app, the missing letters were initially being dropped because I wasn't using Aria Atomic, leading me to learn about the double announcer regions. And that was great. Then I also used the Web Speech API to add an additional feature. So for each new word that you need to type, I create a speech synthesis utterance for that word. And then I call the speak method with it on the Windows speech synthesis object. And this produces synthesized speech for each word as I supply it using a JavaScript API, which is closer to playing an audio file than it is to a screen reader making an announcement. This lets you practice typing live dictated text, which for courtroom reporters and real-time captioners, it's really valuable to practice typing with real spoken words, not just reading words off a screen. It's an entirely different experience. So because of this bug, I actually learned about web speech dictation, and that became a real feature in my app for all my users. Which means constraints lead to creativity. So the next time you're disheartened by cross-browser, cross-device compatibility bugs, I hope you think of this example where my users came away with an extra feature and we came away with a deeper understanding of virtual DOMs and accessibility. As I said, I will be posting links and slides to Twitter as well as Slack later on. You can find me with Dai Does Digital. Otherwise, thanks for listening.
Thanks very much, Dai. Do we have any questions? Nice and close, I like it.
Not so much a question, but you can also use role equals status and role equals log. It's basically like role equals status is a lot like adding that Aria Atomic property. Just like it's very relevant.
Yeah. As I mentioned, AriaLive Regions are usually with the AriaLive attribute on a div, but you can also trigger similar behavior with role equals status, which has implied live region behavior as well as Aria Atomic behavior and an implied,
Role equals log.
Aria relevant behavior, which pays attention to whether you're including just additions or deletions as well and things like that. So your different roles can have some of that behavior for free.
Any more questions?
Thanks. Sorry, I'm not sure I followed in that, like how well, if at all, the speech synthesis part plays nicely with the screen reader part. Do they clash with each other?
Do they clash, Web Speech API and screen readers? There's a time and place for both. As I mentioned, the web speech is a little more like playing an audio file. So in the same way that with playing a video, playing an audio file, with screen readers, you want to be careful about not having them interact at the same time. So typically, if you are interacting with a web page and want to play a video, that is the focus of what you're doing. So that will play, and you won't be navigating around the page, triggering random other announcements at the same time. So when you are using it for a feature, the Web Speech API, speech synthesis for a feature, try to do it intentionally in that way. So it's a part of the experience and separate from the announcements.
Any more? All right, another round of applause for Dai. Thank you. So we're about to break for lunch. Don't forget, while you're out there, do visit all of the partners out there. There's lots of them giving away prizes, show bags, all this sort of stuff, so go and have a chat with everyone. We're going to be back at 1:20, so see you then.